There are 22 mainline DLCs for EU4, and it's time to rank them in the only objective way possible, a tier list. Now, DLCs don't inherently have try-hard values assigned to them. There is no objective, this DLC gives you more bonus than another DLC, so the comparison today's are going to be made, for once, purely based on vibes and how good I think the content is within each DLC. After all, a DLC adding plus 5% discipline versus another one adding plus 10% discipline, well, the plus 10% discipline DLC isn't objectively better, as the notion of power creep is within domain of discussion here. There is also the matter of price too, but here I have to mention that while the sticker shock value of like 1.2 million USD worth of DLC is scary, well, the many sales throughout the years combined with the DLC subscription option that gives you all the DLC for like 5 quid a month does mean that my monetary suggestion for EU4 is use a subscription to see if you're actually interested in playing the game, and if you still want to play EU4 after like a couple months, go buy the DLC on sale so you're not paying Paradox $5 a month forever. It also means that a discussion of is it worth it can depend a lot on your region and your financial state. You know, $20 isn't exactly the same amount for different people in different life situations. There's also the matter of sailing the high seas, since the topic of price is brought up. But let's also be honest here, if you're doing that, you're still going to be doing that regardless of what I tell you. There's finally, on top of everything mentioned today, the small matter that some of the DLCs were added into the base game. But considering that for the vast majority of the game's history, you could buy those DLCs and they are still toggleable as DLCs in the game, I'm going to treat them as DLCs because that's what they are. They're DLCs with a permanent 100% off sale. Anyway, enough disclaimers, but before we do start, I'd like to know you'd appreciate it if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. But with all that said and done, let's begin with the first DLC dropping in version 1.4 all the way back in 2014. We're talking about the Conquest of Paradise. I guess this is a good time as any to mention that I will be talking purely about the expansion features and the stuff that came in the free side of the update. That's everyone gets that. I'm not going to be discussing it, but anyway, the first thing that is happening is going to be the random new world generator button. This thing's basically broken. I mean, it does load and work sometimes. However, out of all the features, this one just doesn't really work, and I think that's the best way of describing it. The pre-generated new worlds are a bit wacky and all over the shop, and not in a good way, so this feature, I mean, it's used in, like, once in a blue moon for people, like, once out of 1,000 hours to, like, oh, I want to see what the button does, and that's about it. A lot of missions also very much break with it, and the entire setup is a mess. So basically, the random new world feature is, like, conceptually a thing that happens, and if it was a side thing, I wouldn't, you know, just mention that, like, oh, by the way, they added the random new world button, but it's kind of like the main part of this DLC, because beyond that, they also added new mechanics for the tribal nations in North America. You've got the native buildings, the reformation of the government, and the Federation's Casus Belli mechanics. That's really cool. Unfortunately, you have to play a native in North America, and this DLC didn't exactly fix the issue that you're playing a native in North America. It still absolutely sucks. The best way of actually exploring these mechanics, if you do want to see them, ironically enough, is Anbanar, and the like nations they have in their Escan area. Those use those mechanics, but like in a good way, and I would recommend it. Basically, you actually reform out of like your migrationary tribe, but not bad, into an Ascani nation, and hence I would suggest going through those mechanics and experience them through Anbanar, because they basically use those, well, mechanics, as aforementioned here, in a good way. But in terms of playing it in the base game, even if you are playing a Native American, you're probably just going to be playing an Inca or an Aztec, so you're going to be avoiding this whole situation. So yeah, that's a whatever feature. And finally, you can play as someone's colonial nation, or sorry, as your own colonial nation. You can release a colonial nation and play as it yourself. Great. I mean, you're playing a colonial nation, so it's not great, but for some Exodus builds, it's now more possible and doable, so it's an option, I guess, and nice to see they've added a bit more content to it, but bear in mind, this isn't the unique government reforms for all the colonies. That comes later, and ironically enough, other DLCs and expansions. This is just the ability to physically be able to play as a colonial nation. So, yeah, no. In essence, this is kind of just all mech things that would have been great when thrown on the sides, but when you talk about it this way, and I guess it just didn't age too well, and we have a beautiful definition of what a D-tier DLC is going to be. And with that, we're going to move on to patch 1.6, which added the Wealth of Nations update. Now, Wealth of Nations is an interesting DLC as well. Certainly, again, you can tell of its age. First of all, we can now create trade conflicts. Great. When was the last time you actually declared a trade war? That wasn't you accidentally fat-fingering and declaring a trade war by accident when you didn't mean to declare a trade war. Exactly. You can also do privateering now. That's neat. That's not a bad feature. You can do some naval trolling about privateering. That's okay. I'll rate that one. We then get the ability to move your main trade capital. This is good. This is an actually useful feature. This is nice. Really shouldn't be a DLC thing. I feel like that's a pretty built-in mechanic. But there you go. It's there, and I have to rate it. You get improved trading in inland nodes. Nice. It's basically the inland node bonus mechanics. That's okay. Trade companies are added. This is actually good. I'll accept trade companies being a bit more of a DLC feature. Trade companies are cool. I like trade companies. This is the Wealth of Nations. This part, unironically, is a big part why some nations are rich. So I'll give them that. You get the Hindu and Norse rulers being able to pick deities mechanic. Okay, it's a bit weird and a bit random to shove that into a DLC, but sure. Hindu really relies on the deities to, well, be a good religion, and Norse kind of relies on being in the game, which they're not yet, so this is only for CK2 conversion builds when you really get mentioned. So this is getting a bit more of a meh feature. And the Reformed religion gains the Fervor mechanics. Fervor, Fever, basically where they gain the points they can spend it on military, diplomatic, or trade bonus focuses. That's neat, it's another small buff to the religions. This DLC is mainly carried by the ability to designate a port as your main trade capital. That's good. And trade companies being a whole mechanic, for lack of a better word. Still is quite a bit lacking and is a bit random in terms of the things you're actually getting that you're paying for. But overall, I think the trade companies and that whole mechanics and flavors around them are pretty good, and so it's going to be dragging this DLC all the way up into B tier. And with that, we move on to the next DLC, Res Republica, or Res Publica, Republics, the Republic DLC. This gives you the Dutch Republic's unique mechanic. That's neat, good flavor if you're playing in the Netherlands, makes sense. You also get the whole dictatorship mechanics for republics when your tradition gets too low, so that's neat. Well, you know, that's nice. I do like that, and extra flavor for republics is always good. I think republics are one of the more fun governments to play around as well. Great for roleplay, so yeah, can't complain about more stuff for them. Merchant republics can now play trading post in each node. That's more annoying because I tend to find that I don't have to play many merchant republics, and now merchant republics are more annoying against me. But it's a buff to the AI basically, and I don't mind that. That's there. You have a new diplomatic action against elected monarchies to support heirs. That's nice against Poland sometimes, but really whatever. It's nice the PowerPoints if you want to micro it, but this is, again, another whatever feature. You get the action for elected monarchies to support your own noble to the throne. Again, this is basically just elected monarchy gaming, but you take it. And it gives a whole bunch of events for Dutch republics and elected monarchies and dictatorships. Neat. More events is good. Can't complain about that. And now here's the big one. This DLC adds the ability to set your national focus. You change which monarch points you generate, improving one aspect at the expense of the other two. It's kind of weird because this feature requires either this or common sense. It's like you need one of the two DLCs to unlock it because it really should be in the base game. And they kind of did eventually put it in the base game, but it's technically there in this DLC. It's not great. There's at least some flavor here. The mechanics kind of exist. This has been really carried by the Dutch Republic and the Dutch, you know, Republic flavor, for lack of a better word, which it makes sense for something called Res Republic, but otherwise, as far as DLCs go, it's eking out into C tier, and we're going to call it at that. And with that, we move on to Art of War. So this was, of course, added into the base game, thank God, because, dear God, without it, this would be really painful. It adds the abilities to set priorities for people to, you know, go do things, like set the AI priorities to transfer occupations, just a whole bunch of stuff like that. That's really helpful and useful. It kind of got integrated into the base game again, so in terms of talking about its value is a bit disingenuous in that sense, but either way, that's something I mentioned in the introduction. It also gives you the whole march mechanics and like peace mechanics around the around how wars work, and on top of everything, it also changed around the armor builder. So just good stuff all around. You can now also, if you have a vassal that has cause another land, declare wars for your subjects. And on top of that, in terms of everything else, you've got the ability to do the religious league wars, which is actually cool and I think a pretty underrated mechanic. You have the ability to give up cause, revolutionary targets matter, and you gain the ability to cancel idea groups, which why is this not in the base game? Why is the ability to cancel idea group not in the base game? That part is criminal. So yeah, it's actually a really good DLC. A lot of the features it adds are really crucial to playing the game. The problem is all the features it adds are really crucial to playing the game. So yeah, Art of War is an excellent DLC because all the stuff it added was great. So much so they had to basically add it to the base game. It kind of was one of those mandatory DLCs for ages to actually have the game and not kind of a... I think the best way of describing it is that EU4 without Art of War and later Common Sense. are best described as kind of a demo of the game, a paid demo, if you will. But with that, we move on to El Dorado, one of our first colonial DLCs. Well, realizing that people don't actually like playing colonial nations, it also gives you the nation designer to do custom nations and that. And you know what? I think custom nations are pretty underrated for EU4. A lot of people do custom nations, have fun with custom nations, and I know that in the environment of like an EU4 simulator where you have to be historically accurate and all that, at least with custom nations, there's the liberty of having more fun with it. You can have some more overpowered things. Custom nations are fun. So that's just a nice positive. And locking custom nations behind a DLC is probably the least egregious thing out of anything. It is just extra content here. You also get the new like Nahuatl, Inti, and Mayan religion stuff, and you get the sun worship from them. That's neat. That's a nice mechanic. You get the Conquistadors hunt for the 7 cities of gold. It's an auto-explore button. Okay, let's just be honest, it's an auto-explore button, but hey, nice. And you get gold fleets. So gold fleets are good. They kind of got reworked a bunch of times, and they both privateer them, and gold fleets happening, I think, is great for the flavor of the game. The game strength mechanic of it is a bit of a separate debate, but I think from just a flavor and value out of the game, gold fleets are nice. Frankly, probably a bit too nice. Should probably be in the base game, but yeah. You now also, by the way, finally have the ability to hunt pirates. Please remember that the ability to privateer was added much previously, and back in the day when that was added, you couldn't really stop privateers, you just kind of had to deal with it. But now, congratulations, with this DLC, you can deal with the privateering DLC that was added like 3 DLCs ago. Good job. It's an interesting one. I think the I think the Hunt for the 7 Cities is a neat concept, but this is really a DLC carried by the nation designer. With that said, the nation design is pretty big, so it's going to be enough to drag this DLC into the B tier. And we're going to be moving on from El Dorado now to Common Sense. Again, reintegrated into the base game. It had so much stuff in here. Theocracies basically got a mechanic. Constitutional monarchies, Protestantism got like flavor and a thing that happens. You can now like remove electorates and grant electorates. There's the government ranks feature to be a duchy, a kingdom, a kingdom, an empire, all of that stuff, absolutely amazing and was actually added here. Buddhists have discipline now, have karma and those whole mechanics. You can return provinces to existing nations, to return cores and all those things. Not that useful, but, you know, is a massive feature. You have subject interactions for subject types. I mean, again, subject interactions like taking trade value and stuff. All of those things are now added in Common Sense. I mean, yeah, it's Common Sense. It's a great DLC to burn. You can now dismiss advisors from the pool. Again, talking about the burn of the, burning advisors. But yeah, so you can now cycle advisors. This is a mechanic that is DLC locked because of course it is. And again, promotion of advisors is a DLC thing. Congratulations. Got loads of extra flavor events for Buddhists, Protestants, theocracies, the Pope, everything under the sun. And it also gives you national focuses, again, just on the side if you don't have Res Publica. So this is joint, I believe, with Art of War for basically Art of War and Common Sense are the kind of 2 DLCs you need to stop playing the demo version of EU4. So I'm aware that they are reintegrated to the base game, but for that reason they are just massive in terms of the content and improvement of the game that they added, basically. And this was on top of the update as well, giving loads of like other small stuff like Tengri and Zoroastrian religion bonuses, and I mean just adding them into the game and a lot of stuff like that, right? Like the building system was completely reworked and that update. It was thankfully not part of the DLC, but you don't no longer like build buildings with menus not with menus. You build buildings with money now, not with mana. So yeah, that's the thing. And I mean, looting is now in the game. For example, you can actually loot money from provinces. So yeah, certainly quite a major update and DLC, and just the features within the DLC kind of made it almost mandatory to buy if you actually wanted to play EU4. With that, we move on to the Cossacks, probably the first of the major controversial DLCs, lack of a better word. And ironically, because this would become an issue later, but would not be repeated for a little bit, the Cossacks was just really strong. And I think that's kind of part of the issue of why it was so controversial, and it's kind of funny now in hindsight, seeing the controversies around this DLC being really powerful and the power creep being an issue, and then looking at the later DLCs with the insane power creep. But there we go. Right, so first of all, you get diplomatic actions. You can let you know what you think of your neighbors, because you can go and say, I actually hate you or like you. This is somewhat useful sometimes from a micro point of view, but it's nice. It's kind of a whatever point though, but it's neat. You can also do designations of places of interest. This is also great for working with AI allies, but I don't really bother this anymore because I don't really bother to ally the AI. Tengri now gets a syncretic faith mechanic and gets a lot more content, which is nice, and you can kind of tell this is a Horde-esque focused DLC, because Horde Unity is here, as is Raising. So basically, Horde gameplay as you know and love it today in its, I won't say completed form, but in its conventional form is added within the Cossack DLC. So there we go. Culture conversion is kind of explored here. You can also return a province to its initial like day one culture, so that's neat. And you also unlock the native colonization like options basically. So if you want to be native trading or colonial growth, those kind of buttons, that's added here. You may be wondering why the Cossacks DLC has added a colonial feature, but bear in mind this is before Siberian Frontiers is added. So this is for Russia like colonizing Siberia pre-Siberian Frontiers, so you have to do it with colonists. You get better espionage, you can give more spy actions to like prod your rivals basically, like for lack of a better word, you know, steal maps from them and stuff, so that's neat. And you also get the passive tech cost reduction if you have a high spy network built, so that's another neat feature, but very few people bother with that, which you should. It's a good bonus, but, you know, that's added into the game. That's about that. And the Threat and War button. Again, very underrated. I think the Threat and War button is pretty underrated for what it does. If you can just threaten a war for one province, if you need 1 province for a mission and just move on with your life, it tends to be pretty worth it instead of having to start a major war, so that's neat. It also, of course, adds 3 new estates, the tribes for the, well, nomads, so this is all your hordes, they're now gaming. So again, this is what I mean by the nomads can now actually play the game, not the nomads, I keep thinking of like the CK2 nomads. I do mean the hordes, they can actually play the game now, they have their tribes estate, they have all that going for them. The Dhimmi is there for a bit of India gameplay, because this is back in the day when Paradox was sprinkling random features, and of course the actual namesake of the estate of the Cossacks are added, and they are naturally very strong. They didn't really get buffed during this entire period, and they're still considered a pretty good estate nowadays, so you can tell that, especially back in the day when there were a lot less modifiers running around, this was a good estate. You also get the Cossack government stuff, and you get new convenience options for building armies, base team, and upgrade to the macro builder. Good DLC, absolutely. Controversial for power creep, well, less of an issue now. I think it's a very nice feature-heavy DLC, but it's also feature-heavy DLC in a way that if you're not playing Hordes, you don't care. So I think that actually makes it a very nice exemplar DLC of what makes a good DLC for me. Not as crucial as some of the previous ones, and if you ignore the controversy of the time and purely look at it in hindsight, I think it's a very, very solid DLC that really expanded a lot of core elements of the game. So into A tier it goes. And with that, we move on to Mare Nostrum. Woo, Navy DLC, yay! I am known as not the biggest appreciator of Navy, and as part of this, it's kind of an issue because, of course, I don't like Navy too much, and then other people realize they don't like Navy, so it's kind of a bit of a feedback loop in terms of disliking Navy. And I've explored why Navy is bad, even though Navy is conceptually cool. Like, I have to admit, if you take a step back from, like, EU4 and a lot of video games failure at looking at Navy, Navy is cool, but again, this is a topic I've explored in a previous video, so feel free to look at why does naval combat suck if you happen to not have seen that video yet. Anyway, with that said, Mare Nostrum is not just a Navy update, despite looking like a Navy update, it had some other stuff. Barbary nations can now raid coast, that's neat, it's kind of a big part of their game plan, so again, a good thing, but I can see it being locked behind a DLC, because again, if you're not playing a Barbary nation, it's okay, you don't need that feature. I guess to make them even weaker. You can now actually do the hunting naval mission and the evasion naval missions and those kind of naval missions. Those are neat. People don't really use anything apart from the exploration naval mission, I'll be honest, but I guess it exists. You can now unconditionally surrender. The AI doesn't unconditionally surrender yet, this just exists for multiplayer, I guess, but there you go. The unconditional surrender is here. All the French gaming enjoyers can now roleplay as appropriate. You can also have the bonuses added, well, sorry, the spy network bonuses are now added to, like, the AE reduction, those kind of things. Like, those weird mini interactions, like the siege speed from spy networks are added in this DLC. A bit whatever, but it's neat. And you can also, again, gain the ability to, like, slander merchants and stuff, so more spy network expansion. They're really trying to make you take espionage ideas yet, but they don't realize the way to make you take espionage ideas is, of course, to add aggressive expansion into them. But there we go. It also does, again, unlock the Hunt Pirate mission if you don't have El Dorado, because they do love to double dip their features in the DLCs in this case. Condottieri are also added, which is neat, but it's a very whatever mechanic, I'll be honest. Condottieri is great in multiplayer for letting you see enemy wars, but outside of that, it's a very whatever mechanic. I guess you can make it build around it single player, but very few people have, so I don't know, I think it's maybe underrated, but also pretty meh as well. Sailors are also automatically pressed when you occupy coastal provinces. Great. I That's a feature. I don't think I've ever really been short on sailors, but good to know. There's also detach damage and repair damaged option. Neat, bit more quality of life. Can't complain. You now have also gained the ability to promote mercantilism. This is really nice because there's an achievement to get to 100 mercantilism. So without this DLC, getting to 100 mercantilism is really difficult, basically. So congratulations. And in a weird twist of irony, and kind of a big part of this, like, DLC that I think makes it quite good, because it's great for like a postpartum of games and looking at it, and a great analysis technique. The timeline feature in the top right, we can look at like the history of the game, basically, or the history of your world. That's added here, and that's a really cool feature, and it's very unintuitive. It's a great DLC thing because it's a very whatever feature. Otherwise, the game is still playable without it. But it's a neat thing, and I really endorse that as, again, another DLC mechanic, so that's nice. And yeah, that's a big part of carrying this DLC. And you finally get the ability for a trade league person to create a trading city, whatever. You sometimes create a trading city. I guess if you're going for that Venice achievement where you need to get a bunch of money before you have 10 provinces, you spam trade cities. Great. Beyond that, they're whatever. You're better off just owning the land. And again, controlling trade is easier by just owning everything. So there you go. For me, the timeline feature is enough to grab Mare Nostrum into the B tier, and a couple of the other small features like that are great, like the Barbary flavors, but we've seen a bit of a fall-off by this point for the DLCs, and hence reflected by the placement. And with that, we move on to the Rights of Man. So this was, again, one of the other ones that was added back into the base game, but at that point it had Coptic being added, that had holy sites. So for the record, when Rights of Man came out, Coptic became the strongest religion in the game, and then power creep happened, and for ages it was basically the worst religion in the game, and it got a couple buffs, especially when Monuments came around in Leviathan. Bit of a spoiler for that later, but that wasn't great. You then, however, within this DLC, I mean, Coptic nations got their flavor, fetishists got their flavor, ruler personalities and leader traits were added here, so that's nice. You also got king, queen consorts and consort regencies, which is neat, but it's neat because you can actually declare war during consort regencies as opposed to just a generic regency, which for some reason stops you declaring war. I'm not sure why that's a feature, but it's kind of like, you've solved a problem you introduced, thanks. You've added the ability to abdicate, and heirs can now be disinherited, so rest in peace, one of the big advantages of republics, consistency, because monarchies can now just disinherit all their bad rulers consistently, but it's a good option. You get more detailed military instructions for subject nations. This is the attached stuff or the siege stuff. Great, should probably be in the base game, but neat. And you can now develop provinces in your subjects and build buildings in them. Why is this a DLC? But I guess, again, that's why it's in the base game now. It's a neat feature when it was added, but it really shouldn't be DLCs. Revolutionary Republics gain factions, extra flavor, that's nice. Ottoman Empire gets a bunch of events, neat. Prussia gets militarization, that's nice. Great Power mechanic is added, neat. That's also another, like, neat mechanic and should have been in the game, but wasn't. And the final thing for the great flavor, casualty statistics in the war overview window, that exists now. That's good. I like that. That was neat. Again, it's pro play flavor thing. You can absolutely play the game without seeing that, oh, in this war I killed 50,000 enemies. But when it is present, it's nice, and I do rate that. And of course, finally, the greatest of them all, the debase currency button is added. Thank you. It is the right of man to debase your currency. Make of that what you will, but that's the takeaway Paradox wants you to think, so congratulations. In terms of features, this is, again, a really big, heavy one, which is why I was added back to the base game. And at the time, an excellent DLC, but yes, it's kind of marred from the fact that why isn't all of this in the base game, right? Like, ruler personalities, like, should not be limited by DLC, in my opinion. However, when you're looking at the DLC itself and its feature list, an absolutely classic case of something going into the A tier. Not quite the S tiers of the previous ones, but something here nonetheless. And with that, we move on to the Mandate of Heaven. So this doesn't just give China mechanics, even though it does give a lot of China mechanics. You now get the Golden Age mechanics and the Age objectives and those things. Those are cool. I think that's really cool. And I don't actually mind Golden Ages and the Age objectives being locked behind a DLC, to be honest. So that's like not that big of a deal as you'd think, because I think Golden Age is very much a secondary extra mechanic on top. It's not necessary to the base game, in my opinion. You can disagree with me if you wish. I mean, arguably all of this should be in the base game and DLC shouldn't exist, but I think that's a reductive argument as well. With that said, moving swiftly on, the DLC as well does add tributaries as a mechanic. That should probably be in the base game. I feel like China isn't the only one that has tributaries, and Hordes also get tributaries, and that whole mechanic should be more open to everyone else. But the Chinese Empire gaining mechanics from Ming China, like the Imperial Decrees and the Reforms, that's neat. And that's absolutely a DLC if you don't want to play in China, or you're not playing as the Ming with the Mandate. That's okay if you're missing that. Daimyos and the Shogun and that whole mechanic also happens in this update. That's nice. That's neat. And again, I also agree that, like, if you're not playing in Japan, you don't need this mechanics. That's neat. It's a very Asia-heavy update, as you might be able to tell from the Mandate of Heaven. Manchu banners are added. Okay, an extra unit. No issues there. But one of the other things that I will have to complain about is the diplomatic macro builder. This is where you can go into the macro builder and see who you can build an alliance with, or you can assign a diplomat to go and automatically improve relations with people, that kind of stuff. It's neat. That should be in the base game, but it's a very useful one with that. I think it's kind of one of those weird cases where there's an argument to be made that it's an automation feature and like it doesn't necessarily belong in the base game, but purely based on vibes, I think it should be. You also gain religious mechanics for Confucian nations and stuff. I think that's okay because it's a very China-heavy DLC to have that locked away, but I don't like locking away religious flavor behind DLCs, for example. I think that's not a line I want to cross, but either way. And finally, something that should absolutely 200% be in the base game, and it's criminalism, the prosperity mechanic. I'm sorry, our nation's just not able to become prosperous. Like, oh, the prosperity's gone away, not because the Mongol horde arrived and burned everything to the ground. No, the prosperity's gone away because we disabled the DLC. That's, I mean, peak paradox moment for sure, but yeah, I'm not a fan of that part. Unfortunately, again, I'm not here to discuss what should or shouldn't be in the base game, despite that's my discussion being. In terms of features added, though, it's, again, a really, really solid DLC and one I have to commend. So, into A tier it goes. So far, so good. But with that, we now move on to Third Rome. A new one for power creep and Russia becoming giga strong. This super buffed Russia, and it's super buffed the Orthodox religion. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Another more controversial topic. So, we gained Tsardoms and Principalities, which didn't really get buffed or changed since then, and they are considered very strong today. So, super big power creep. The Orthodox Church gains Iconography, massive power creep. Metropolitans are added, more massive power creep. Streltsy are added, more power creep. Siberian Frontier somehow, on top of everything mentioned here again, even more power creep for even faster Siberian colonization. And Russia now gets missions. Well, compared to the previous DLC, this was a bit more controversial because it didn't include any base game mechanics that people love to talk about. So, for example, like the prosperity thing. So this is purely based upon, like, Russia gaming, basically. If you're playing in Eastern Europe, or you're playing as Russia, or you're playing as one of the, like, other mini-Russia successor states like Novgorod, or you're trying to do a Ruthenia game or something like that, that's great. Otherwise, this DLC does pretty much nothing for you, which I think is good. I think it's, if you don't want to play in Eastern Europe, you shouldn't be forced to get a DLC, basically, just to get prosperity. So for me, I think that's fine. As a breakdown, unfortunately, this is also... There's a step back from the power creep, but very little here got nerfed. So for me, this kind of DLC is one of the first, like, genuine ticks in my head where I have to go, you know what? Yeah, this is the start of the power creep. And that, for me, really... drops back the DLC quite a lot. And I know this is not an objective truth in this question if you're buying the DLC, so I have to say that if you're looking at just purchasing it for content, Third Rome is around an A tier. But the vibes from the power creep and the start of it is going to be the thing that knocks me down into C, from a vibes point of view. However, again, as much as I did say this is a vibes tier list, I have to look at it from a value of what the DLC itself actually offers, and from a gameplay, that kind of skew, I'm going to have to pump it back up into A. There's going to be a bit more of a separate discussion and distribution of some of the later DLC spoilers, but that's going to be that for Third Rome. And with that, we move on to Cradle of Civilization. You get the Egyptian Mamluk government, like, mechanics around it, the Persian theocracy mechanics and tribal federations. It's a bit of a whatever flavor, it's just a button you press. I don't particularly like that flavor of it that much, but it's a thing. You get trade policies, these are good, but also tend to be pretty ignored, like the promote profiteering or the diplomacy or religious propagation. Religious propagation is very overpowered, but otherwise, outside of religious propagation, people don't tend to use trade policies. The Islamic schools are added, it's a small side thing, very whatever, and again, should really be in the base game. Army professionalism is added here as well, should absolutely be in the base game. And now please also tell me why exploiting development is not in the base game as well. And I guess this is also a case of a weird DLC in the sense of, like, okay, trade policies, you can make the case should be in the base game, but they're very whatever. Army professionalism, yeah, it sounds important, but when you actually look at the format that Army Professional was implemented in, it really isn't as impacting as it really should be during this time period. So again, it's very whatever, because let's be honest, Army Professionalism as a mechanic is competing with Miltech levels as another mechanic, and just Western tech groups versus Eastern tech groups as another mechanic of professionalism. So you kind of have three separate things trying to represent the same concept. And drilling is both undervalued, but also no one bothers to do it as a game mechanic too. So it's kind of a weird one for me. You also pick up ICTA taxes. Great, Muslim governments can get like some more CCR reductions. Neat. And you can now religiously convert your subjects. It's useful if you are trying to go for a one face or something, or convert for your subjects. Sure, that's valuable. Otherwise, that's very whatever. And yeah, great. You get some new mechanics to changes to national ideas. Why are those new ideas locked behind a DLC? I'm just not even gonna talk about that. But yeah, it's a peak should be in the base game expansion, and even from like a flavor point of view, it's really distributed across the world. Like Muslims make up a large majority of nations that you'll be considering playing, so this is a lot of flavor for them. Army Professionalism applies to like basically every single country. So yeah, it's features that should not be in the base game. Sorry, it's features that should absolutely be in the base game, but they're not like enough to justify DLC almost, if that makes sense. So Cradle of Civilizations for me is a C tier on a good day, so that will be its placement. And with that, we move on to Rule Britannia, the first of the, like, I'm not going to say the first, but definitely one of the earlier immersion packs focusing on an area, which is kind of ironic now because all those missions got overworked. So, innovativeness is added as a mechanic. They should be in base game. You get naval doctrines, very whatever. Anglicanism as a religion is added. That's neat, but probably one of the highlights. England and Ireland get missions. The Irish missions are not worth a DLC now, and the British missions got domination to be better. So if you want to play as England or Britain, just get domination. So now it's just out of date. Knowledge sharing is a great mechanic, but if you are getting this to play in England, not great and should be in the base game. And yeah, that's about it. Rule Britannia, for me, if England was reliant on Rule Britannia missions, would be like a C tier DLC. But now with domination kind of overtaking it, you're really just paying for Anglicanism and innovativeness. It's almost a prerequisite to play a proper GB game, but you can also just do domination and get 80% of the way there. And as much as this hurts me saying this, but Rule Britannia is not unfortunately going to be ruling the D tiers as a DLC right now from what it offers. And with that, we move on to Dharma. Dharma was the one only big update for India. It was absolutely great for India, and it had a lot of features that frankly should have been again in the base game, but were great. So governments now stop being just, you are monarchy, or you are now Western monarchy, or you're now like a Ottoman monarchy. You actually get all those monarchy tiers, like you actually get all those government tiers, like a tier 2 reform, tier 3 reform, and all those things. Those are great. I think that's really good and offered so much potential for modding and custom content around that. It's kind of foundational to the game, I think. So designing your governments and the unique reforms and all that should really be in the base game, but it's really foundational from that point of view, and I think that's great. Policy systems expanded the ideas selection and customization around your country. Again, is absolutely amazing. Trade companies got expanded. You can now do a lot more trade company investments and stuff. Again, great stuff. And as well as you can now... It's not like Europeans can trade company regions. It's now based upon your capital. So if you are an African empire, you can actually trade company in Europe and so on. So that's an amazing feature, and that's great. Indians get estates and missions, great boost to that. The Mughals get the assimilation mechanic and a lot of really fun gameplay. I think Dharma Mughals were probably one of the most fun things to experience. It's now reduced because of the new domination Mughals, but it's certainly there. And hey, if you're playing in India, you're basically still using Dharma missions, so that's something to mention. And you can now upgrade trade centers. Why in God's green earth is not in the base game, I don't know, but it's here, so yeah. You get a lot of other small stuff like the monsoon seasons. Colonists can now do non-colonial development, and you get scornful insults, but like, whatever. It's a weird DLC. I think it's... If India got another DLC, which, like, reworked everything and gave Indians new missions, Dharma would be knocked down a bunch. But it has the flavor for India content. India's a fun place to play. The trade company investments are nice, and the government things like that as a base game... I know it should be in the base game, like the government changing, but it was genuinely a big innovation at the time, and not one of the things people were thinking about, I don't think. I mean, I played in that era. I don't think a lot of people were discussing it as a concept, but it was just a really good addition. And I think on that like scale, it's certainly worth it to go into B tier. But yeah, if India ever gets a mission tree, or you ever are playing with like a mod that adds missions for India, certainly probably knocked down into C by this point. With that said, though, we move on to Golden Century. Well, the Golden Century, as ironic as it may sound, the first thing it provides you is the ability to expel minorities. I know, kind of take that out of context, but you can get into a golden age the moment you expel the minorities. Thank you, Paradox. You also get to establish holy orders. Those things are really, really strong. It's a pure power creep button, but it's great, and I like pressing it. Neat flavor, and I agree for that to be like in the DLC. Pyro Republics are added. Those are just fun, and I also agree with that being a DLC feature. You don't need Pyro Republics in the base game. Flagships are added. I could see the case for it to be in like the... I think flagships, what you should do is that flagships should be in the base game, but the ability to customize your flagships I'll accept as a DLC feature. And Naval Barrage should be in the base game, I'm sorry. Now, in terms of the actual, like, getting the DLC right now, what you're kind of getting is flagships, some Navy stuff, and Holy Orders for Spain. But if you're doing Spain gameplay, you're probably doing it with Domination, which gave them a much better mission tree. Pyro Republics kind of need Golden Century just to play the game, otherwise they're very whatever. And Naval Barrages are... it should be in the base game, frankly, but I guess are neat. Not the great DLC and certainly did not age too well, but I can't justify a D tier. I think Holy Orders and Pyro Republics are still fun enough to squeeze out a C positioning for Golden Century, so that's where I'll be placing it. And with that, we move on to... not actually this DLC in question, that's a... fascinating, wait a minute, so with... wait a minute, so we had Dharma, we had Golden Century... Oh no, we do have Emperor next. We do not have Leviathan. I guess I'm jumping the gun. I was like, we have... it's Emperor time. No, it is... sorry, it's Leviathan time. No, it is not Leviathan time. It is Emperor time. And Emperor was... it came with a warning. Because let's mention the release of Emperor, and I think the release of Emperor was somewhat overshadowed by the release of a DLC. I kind of preemptively mentioned Leviathan, the elephant in the room, in the literal and proverbial sense of the term. Emperor on release had a couple broken things, and it was, and by a couple I mean genuinely quite a few broken things, and those got fixed. And what I mean by broken is, I mean Austria could do a revoke in 1454, and you can add everyone you want to the HRE. Like, you could just day one invite like Albania to the HRE on release Emperor patch, and what would happen is that like you would add all these nations to the HRE, and invite nations to the HRE gave you loads of like HRE reform progress, and then they were in the HRE, so they were members, so they contributed more towards the, not the reform progress, but like the Imperial Authority. So you could genuinely just do a revoke as Austria in like 1454 because of the released Emperor DLC innovations. How that got through testing is, well, proof there wasn't any testing, to be honest, because the only way you'd test this and not see it is if you did AI-only games, because the AI still wouldn't do that, but of course, like 3 games is the main feature of this, which was an HRE rework, you'd notice. So, yeah, HRE finally got a rework. The HRE rework had been a long due thing because the HRE was the same from like release to this DLC. So for 6 years, the HRE screen was like the same. Pope got stuff. You can now appoint cardinals or that papal bull stuff, and basically a massive buff to the Catholics from that. Great stuff on that. Can't complain. The HRE again, all those systems were changed. I think the HRE system became good, so no complaints there. But yeah, certainly was a bit of a warning sign about the stage that Paradox were willing to release DLCs in. Their Revolution remap was neat. I don't think Revolutionary mechanics should be in the DLC, but considering that playing past 1700 is clearly not intended, I can see that being a DLC feature. Hussites added. Okay, I mean, it's an HRE flavor pack. If you're thinking of playing Bohemia, you could probably... well, you should probably pick up the Emperor DLC, fair enough. Hegemonies are added, or hegemonies, however you want to pronounce that. I am, of course, of the opinion that if you are a hegemony or hegemony, you get to choose how words are pronounced. So I'm going to go with hegemonies. So there we go. Hegemonies are added. They're strong, pure power creep, but in the weird sense that if you are a newish player, you're not going to be forming one of those hegemonies. So you get to avoid dealing with hegemonies because yeah, I basically never hegemonies unless you're doing very hard past 1550. So yeah, again, not something you as a new player would encourage unless you're actually set up the game to deal with it. A bunch of mission trees for the European nations, especially based in the Germany area, so that's neat. That part's good. And Defender of Faith is an actual mechanic now, as well as the Council of Trent Counter-Reformation. Frankly, good stuff. And I mean, if you're playing in Germany, Emperor is good. Of course, if you're doing something like Austria, you still probably want domination in terms of flavor, but the Germany mechanics, the HRE stuff, even just the Hussite, stuff like that, and the ability to provoke rebellions. Provoke rebellion should be in the base game. Like, that makes a pretty consistent DLC for me, and I think it worked very well. However, and again, I am rating this from a point of view of buying the DLCs right now, but with the benefit of hindsight, we will say the warning signs were here with Emperor for the state that Paris were willing to release the DLC. But that's a bit of a spoiler for the next one in terms of the placement here. I think it's a solid B-tier DLC. It offers decent options and decent local flavor without enforcing itself if you're playing something like England to be purchased. So there we go. And with that, we move on to Leviathan. I've mentioned a couple times now that Leviathan is a DLC and a topic that deserves a video of its own, and frankly, at some point, I'm going to have to go make that video because it deserves a video on its own. The release of Leviathan, I think... I mean, I'll be honest, if EU4 didn't have as much goodwill as it had at this point, Leviathan would have killed EU4 in its current release date. When I say that that game was broken, I mean it was fundamentally broken. And I don't mean in the sense of like, oh no, the game is running badly or crashes sometimes. No, I mean quite literally, there were loads of bugs like rulers generating with hundreds of thousands of monarch points as their like ruler stats, and then you generate like 15,000 admin a month. There were multiple of the same province instances appearing. The game was inherently just broken on like a almost core level. And to add also insult to injury, and this is one of the reasons I'm a bit cautious about talking about Tinto Talks, is while this was all happening in the dev diaries, because at this point there was a culture around the dev diaries of them publishing all of their content, they would talk about some of the content like the seek mechanics and go, oh, here's the placeholder art. By the way, don't worry, when the game releases, they're still going to have the placeholder art, and it's all going to be fixed now, but this is just the mechanic we're currently working on. We're like, okay, neat, thanks, good to know. And again, very hyped up DLC, because they were offering a lot of really cool stuff. It released with the placeholder art. So much of the DLCs, like they were what they showed you in the dev diaries is what you actually got. There's a lot of mention in the dev diaries that this is placeholder, this is work in progress stuff, and then it released like that. And it also meant there was a massive power creep issue of centralizing states, the consecrate developments, and the pillage capital mechanics. Because basically, you used to be able to pillage without losing development. So if you went to a state that had, like, for example, let's say you had 20 development in every province, and there were 5 of them. You had to consecrate development, each one of those would be decreased by 5. However, all that development would go to your capital, but it wouldn't be adjusted, right? So now if you do that, your capital is like 30 dev, you'd gain like 5 dev. Still good, but you're not going to see your capital go above 50 dev if you're concentrating development. Back in the day of Leviathan release, there was no scaling. And of course, that means you'll be able to convert wrong religion, wrong culture development into capital, which is usually right culture, right religion development. And hence you'll be able to see things like 600 dev capitals. I'm not even kidding. Like, for Dwarven Holds, you'd see provinces with thousands upon thousands of developments until this was reworked. And this took forever to rework because they had just so many other game-breaking bugs and issues to resolve. This was one of the most botched, if not the most botched releases of an EU4 DLC of all time. And for that reason, it has to be mentioned as just something fundamentally and inherently broken. EU4 managed to survive, and I think it managed to survive for 2 reasons. After this, we didn't really get a feature-heavy DLC. There was a lot of dev time spent just fixing the game on a fundamental level. And even the balancing parts that did get fixed eventually, those kind of got thrown to the side, and we had a very unbalanced game that was barely running for quite a long time. And in terms of, again, for context of the unbalancing, this added great projects to the game, which is great. But one of the great projects they added was, of course, the 15% admin efficiency Alhambra, which was nerfed down to 5% admin efficiency, but at 5% admin efficiency, Alhambra is one of the best monuments in the game. It was 15% on release. And again, there was a plus 10% monument, and that 10% monument didn't get changed, but it became one of the defining features of Zoroastrianism. But that's because all the other monuments got nerfed. Release, like, 10% discipline wasn't even one of the biggest tools there. There was from what I remember, a minus 50% advisor cost monument. There was some ridiculous stuff available in those monuments. And again, just huge power creeps, just complete mess of a DLC on release. However, it's not release. You're probably looking at a DLC like Leviathan right now and going, should I buy this, if that's a debate you're having? And in terms of the actual content here, it's good. Colonial nation specialization, that's nice. The ability to consecrate development, purge capitals, expand infrastructure, that whole mechanic, that's good. The centralization state mechanic, probably one of the most underrated buttons in the game. Use that button. But that's just not mentioned. Like, well, it's not really, sorry, it is mentioned, but it's like something you don't do, but you should do. That's a good mechanic. Monuments, that's great. That's a good mechanic. It is a great DLC. It's a feature-heavy DLC. It's a very good DLC, but it does mean that if I have to rate it on the DLC that it is in front of me right now in 2025, it's an A DLC. If, however, I have to rate Leviathan as a release DLC, it has to go in its own tier that basically almost ended EU4 as a game. So make of that what you will. And that's going to be the summary of Leviathan, a very short one, before, if I ever do get around to making the, like, Leviathan retrospective, because, dear God, it's certainly a topic that deserves its own video. And with that, we move on to Origins. Again, the context is, we're still trying to fix Leviathan, but we kind of need to get a DLC out to keep the lights on, right? So this gives you a bunch of flavors around Judaism, because back then Judaism was just kind of one of those small side religions. It now has a bunch of content. That's nice. That's neat. Can't complain about that. There's a bit of a broken thing where basically the way that Judaism worked with the Holy Land is that you'd gain a bonus for retaking the Holy Land. So that's taking Jerusalem, Gaza, and what's the one that's north of Jerusalem? I forgot the name of that province. But basically those three provinces in the Palestine state, right? If you took back all three of those, you'd activate a bonus. But the way they coded it is that if you're Jewish and you own the province, you get a bonus, but they put that bonus on all three provinces. So you actually triple dipped the bonus if you actually owned all three. And you could get just one of the bonuses for only one of them. So you'd get something like, I think it was like plus 5% morale for each one. You'd get plus 15 morale and like an extra missionary for just taking over the entire Holy Land if you're Jewish, which was super strong. But yes, was eventually nerfed. Now this DLC also came with a whole bunch of missions for basically a bunch of African countries, and they're good. I think they're a bit underrated now and started to show their age, but they're neat and they're nothing too inherently overpowered. The Congo missions are nice, but they're not super broken considering the amount of effort you have to go through with them. So yeah, they're neat. Ethiopia's got nice stuff, even though it got expanded later. Mali, Mutapa missions are neat. Again, Mali has that whole mechanic system and quite a fun campaign around it. It's a very solid workhorse DLC. It's not too flashy, and it just adds missions while Paradox is a bit busy trying to fix the game. So yeah, that was its context, but we have to place it on here. And if you're playing in the area, I think it's a solid pick, but if you're not playing in Africa, you can ignore this one pretty safely. So for me, it's a solid B tier DLC. And with that, we move on to Lions of the North. Now, with Lions of the North, Paradox was, I think, near the end of fixing Leviathan. They're practically done fixing Leviathan at this point, but still a couple small things left to tweak. As part of this, though, they are adding a bunch of missions for Sweden and Scandinavia. So Scandinavia is finally worth forming, and Sweden's finally overpowered, because thank you, Paradox, of course it would be. Norway and Denmark finally have content, and the Teutons of Poland, and then that whole, like, group of people in the Baltic get content. So that's good. The content's pretty good. Riga's quite fun. It's not that overpowered as people like to think it is, although it's certainly very strong to make as a vassal. Yeah. There is another thing to mention, though, with this DLC, namely this is the first time they do the branching missions, and the issue with the branching missions when implemented in this version of the game is, of course, that basically the way that they worked right now with the branching mission mechanic, if you can even call it that, is that, well, at current patches, the branching missions, you have like tree numbers you can press on the side of your mission. So you have like 1, 2, 3 to see your branching mission trees, and that's neat. That can give me an idea of what I'm looking at. If you look at something like the Teutonic Order or the Livonian Order missions at release, you look at a mission tree of just got a bunch of question marks. Now this is bad because if I open a mission tree, for example, for like England, I can look through it and I can look at a mission like Burn Down Paris, and at a glance I can tell what this mission is. It's about invading Paris and turning it into a wasteland. If I'm playing as Spain and I see a mission like colonize the Caribbean, I can say, oh, it's a colonial mission. And if I see a mission like Burn Down Paris, I can also go, yeah, this is the mission to burn down Paris. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that it should be a default mission for every single nation. Every single nation should have a mission to burn down Paris. Maybe wondering, maybe I shouldn't have that mission tree for France. But you know what? I think the Parisians are the most dedicated to burning down Paris. So I think France deserves the burn down Paris mission anyway. Regardless, my point is that there's a lot of information communicative just looking through a mission tree at a glance and being able to tell what you want to do. And with a mission tree, that's just a set of question marks that gets revealed as you go through your branching missions. Cool in concept, and the Teutonic Order missions are very nice about either going into Germany and becoming like an early Germany, or going Holy Horde. Great gameplay. I think it's cool. It's very neat. It's just ruined by their implementation of branching missions at this point, so that's a bit of a sad side point. With that said, new Polish missions are neat. All of the content around it is nice, and it's nothing too overpowered. It's a good workhorse DLC in the sense that if you're not playing in the area, you don't really care about it. But if you are, it's a lot of nice flavor. So it is yet again another case for something into the B tier. And with that, we move on to Domination. Frankly, probably the final DLC of EU4, its spirit, even though it really wasn't. It was 3 DLCs away, unless they Paradox squeeze out just another quick DLC right before they release EU5, I mean Project Caesar. So Domination basically looked back at all of the big nations that people actually play, France, Britain, Spain, Russia, Japan, and the Ottomans, and realized, wait a minute, and China to be clear, like, we've got all of this people basically playing these nations, but they're playing mission trees we made back in 2017. So they sat down, and they just gave loads of content for the major nations. Now, usually when I talk about a regional content pack, I'm like, you don't have to buy this if you don't want to play it, but you kind of want to play Japan or Russia or the Ottomans or Spain or France or England, right? Or GB in this case, sorry to be clear. Because, you know, they're kind of the missions of, like, even if you're not starting as Great Britain, if you're not starting in England, you're playing as Scotland, you probably want to form Great Britain and play as them. Even if you're starting as someone like Brittany, you want to form France. If you're starting as, like, Aragon, you're not Castile, you're still forming Spain. Even if you're starting as Novgorod, you're forming Russia. And, like, a lot of these nations you still end up basically playing, so they are very nice. And even the other side content for the minor nations, well, the minor nations updated here are Prussia, Portugal, and Korea. Those are very popular nations, and they're very popular for a reason. They're fun nations to play. So this was just a very good round of DLC, kind of dragging a lot of nations into the 2024 dev cycle for good missions and good content. Although actually this was released back in 2023. Damn, time really does fly. Anyway, what I have to say is it's just a good DLC in terms of the content provided. Yeah, it didn't have any new mechanics, but it didn't need to. It just made up for it by providing consistent, good fun throughout them. Yeah, some of them were pretty broken. I mean, the Russian mission tree's completely busted, and the Ottomans are just in their own domain of overpowered. Great Britain gets to spawn coal early, and France basically runs around with even harder win buttons, like the ability to gain Mil Hegemon earlier. So, yeah, and I mean, again, Japan is just Japan. Everyone in this list is super, super strong now. Really not Prussia, I don't think. I don't think Prussia got buffed too much, but it's still a solid choice. And again, Korea is just running around with 3 dev buttons. So very much on the power creep side too, but I think it can be excused because we're talking about the real great powers of history in this case, and Japan. So, you know, it's fair, and I'll let it pass. For me, though, Domination, especially looking at today, is almost a must DLC, and I think it really did, like, even out a lot of the missing features. So for me, it's our final entry into the S tier. Spoilers, I guess. And with that, we move on to King of Kings. So they updated the Ottoman Empire and then realized, wait a minute, we kind of need to give new missions to Persia and the Mamluks, and then realized, okay, Persia's neat, Mamluks are neat, but we can milk the DLC for getting all the Byzantine boosts to buy it, so they gave the Byzantines entire new mission trees. Weirdly, you can kind of tell that Persia, Mamluks, and Byzantium were developed by 3 different people, because the Persian missions are completely and utterly broken. Persia is one of the strongest nations, if not straight up the strongest nation in the game now, and is basically the definition of power creep because it has so many win buttons. It is way, way, way too strong and way, way, way too overtuned. Persia is just too broken. And then you have Mamluks, which, okay, they have some neat, strong bonuses. The ability to get close in your capital is very nice, but doesn't win the campaign on its own. The Mamluk unique unit is neat, but again, it's not a win button. And Byzantium, while it has a lot of flavor and makes for a fun mission tree, it's not actually that overpowered compared to a lot of the other options, like Persia. So, yeah, you can very much tell, like, just from the power level of the missions added, that they were made with different people. So that's that. That's kind of the main line of it. You also get new things for Georgia and Armenia. Now, Georgia, I'm a bit annoyed because they made the Georgian disaster a pop-up for everyone. And I'm not going to lie, if I'm playing a game as France, I do not care that Georgia has entered disaster. I do not need a pop-up. I also do not need a pop-up to tell me that Georgia has concluded their disaster. I don't care. Thank you, Paradox. Very cool. Yemen is very broken, and they got the new missions because they can farm, like, coffee bonuses. I made a video about that. But beyond specifically abusing Yemen missions to get the price of coffee to go to, like, 9 ducats, it's a neat mission tree, nothing to complain about, and nice for local flavor. And yeah, Ardabil gets a bit more content into reforming Persia. That's neat. It's a very workhorse regional DLC, and very much carried by the fact that Mamluks finally got missions. Persia is completely and absolutely broken, so if you want to have a power trip time while keeping the Iron Man to check, go play Persia. And Byzantium is nice because Byzantium is a popular campaign, and they get neat new missions here. So it's a very nice DLC from that point of view, but it's nothing really to call home about. And again, it's just more of like ironing out features that were neglected throughout the years. So again, for me, I can't put it any higher than B tier, but I think a B tier is probably the peak that, like, I can't knock it down to C tier either. And with that, we finally move on to Winds of Change. God, this DLC is so stupidly broken in weird and bad ways. The Aztecs are just completely overpowered now. The ability to get High American. High American's meant to be an Easter egg. They added that as an ability to just become High American. Nope. Bad. No High American. I cannot recommend that, like, from a balance point of view. I guess it's fun if you're playing it, but it just kind of made Native Americans and Aztecs go from completely unplayable to the optimal way of playing the game is Austrian, you become Aztec primary culture. I'm not actually kidding. That's genuinely one of the optimal way of squeezing out core creation cost. Even the Papal No Culture, No Religion run, which I've alluded to a couple times and uploaded recently, a cover of that, involved abusing the Aztec missions and content because it's just so goddamn strong. Mayans got even more buffs because, of course, they did, as did the Inca. The Netherlands got a couple mechanics. The Netherlands actually is one of the least egregious, but at least they got new boats. I think the Netherlands is probably what they were kind of trying to aim for, but they completely blew it throughout the water from the Aztecs. Venice is just completely busted now. It is so goddamn strong. It is disgusting of how powerful Venice is now. And I'll put it this way, there's a speedrun category for EU4, which is to try and get to try and get economic hegemon as fast as possible. And you'd think that people would do this something like the Mughals because they can conquer really quickly, or they'll do that as Austria or something because they can do a faster work. No, you do it as Venice because they're so filthy rich and so disgustingly strong at basically making money and being Venice that's the optimal way of routing, like, getting to economic hegemon. In fact, just as a side thing, it's not even mentioned usually, but Venice has one of their missions give them the ability to gain 20% dev cost reduction on forts. Which, to be clear, gives them early universities, because universities minus 20% dev cost. You just gave Venice universities on forts. Thank you, Paradox. Very cool. Austria is now stronger and buffed, because of course it is. Now it's one of the strongest tanks in the game, and is now even stronger. But hey, it's new content, and you know what? Austria historically did do really well, so let them have their fun. I'm not that against Austria doing really well compared to Venice, which was very much on the decline at this point. Hungary and Bohemia weirdly made them formable and have extra content around them. I think that's fine. It's not too egregious. It's pretty strong, but compared to the rest of the game, it's fine. Timmy got a major buff for actually staying Timmy and not becoming Mughals, and I think if you want to play as actual Timmy and not go into a Mughal game every time, I think that part of it is good. And the Mughals got reworked, and I think in a weird way, Mughals are already really, really strong. And this rework didn't make them that much stronger. I think it was a minor buff at best, but it was a lot more flavor buffs, and I think Mughals are just more fun and more fleshed out, even if they're not objectively stronger. So for me, the Mughals are one of the best reworks to see here from that point of view, because they're not stronger. Unless you look at the Timmy buffs, which of course made them stronger, so you arrive at the Mughals stronger, but you get the point. Germany got reworked. Weirdly enough, Germany's actually nerfed now, where you have to go through a bunch of reforms before you actually accept all the German cultures into one big Germany, so that's neat. Italy, of course, got new missions and is now mainly just reforming the Roman Empire as their main thing. Italian missions used to be an absolute joke. Now they're ridiculously strong, including minus 25% dev cost modifier in Rome. Thank you. Very balanced, but you know what? Let people have their fun. And there's a bit more content around, like, Hissing Kaifer and Theodoro, which is neat, can't complain. And of course, all the Hordes got new missions. The actual Horde missions aren't too strong, but they're great for flavor, so that part of it's nice. And you can kind of see a weird, like, mix here. In some cases, you get a lot of good flavor and nice content that I have to rate, but it's really dragged down by just the absolute power creep and just any abandonment of an attempt at balance for things like the Aztecs at this point. And it kind of started with Persia, and it certainly continued with the Aztecs. In fact, if I'm to wager a guess, there's a person at Paradox Interactive that made the Aztec missions, and they also made the Persian missions. This is purely vibes. I could be entirely wrong here, but that's something I want to put out there if people want to join this conspiracy with me. But it does mean that because of this way over-the-top power creep at the end, despite the nice flavors, I'm just going to have to say it's almost more fun to play the Aztecs without this DLC, because they're just way too strong with it. So yeah, I think as much as I'd love to hate on it too much, I can't quite put it into B tier because of that recent power creep. And it's not that much new content, let's be honest. Netherlands isn't the most popular nation, although I think it's still pretty popular. So it's nice if you're playing it, but I can't put it higher than C, which is where I've placed it, and will be concluding the tier list, as it were. Because yeah, I think it could have just been a bit of a better one at the end in terms of its release. And it's not really a historical point because this is the current DLC, so if it gets addressed or fixed, I'll be happy to bump it up to a beep. But there we go. That is, well, the official, I guess, Lemon Cake EU4 DLC. Hope you enjoyed this return to DLCs. Return to tier lists. We haven't had a tier list video in quite a while, so there we go. But with that all said, that is unfortunately all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, W Haste, Seleman, Sal72, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Dan Hatang, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandmill Flavia, Kono, Andres Alberg, Deki, Solve, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, and Mr. Kumshok.